to the news division. So I don't know if someone hired you over or they just needed another body there or what.
No, they just needed another body there. I did. Are we're recording now? I did news as both stage manager in the 68 conventions. I was a stage manager there. But I also did news as an AD. And I did some of it on remote, like primaries, starting in New Hampshire. I would have been in California when Kennedy was assassinated, but I got sick and I had to ask them not to send me, and they didn't, and that's when he was assassinated. But I did work with Kennedy. I think it was in Omaha, Nebraska, at the Omaha primaries, where I sat in a little room half the size of this with Sander Van Oka, young black boy who was a runner for us, and Robert Kennedy, waiting for instructions from the mobile unit about when they were going to come to us live to do an interview with Van Oka and Kennedy.
How big was the team that you were with? How big was the remote team?
The team was very big if you consider all the people sent to cover the actual primary. This happened to be just a remote that I was on. The team was big. I mean, there were directors, associate directors, stage managers. I was stage manager at the time. And of course, there were the people that were at the, the site of the primaries. The main control, the main mobile unit. It was big.
Were you at any of the other major events doing remotes? Like, where were you in April when Martin Luther King was assassinated? Were you working for
No,
NBC?
I was just here. Were we living here then? What year was that?
68. This is all 68.
We had either just moved here or we were about to move here. It might have been in Forest Hills, Queens. No, I wasn't involved in anything, putting anything on the air regarding the assassination of Martin Luther King. Personally, I was very distressed by it because big admirer of Martin Luther King.
Did you find out by the television? Did you find out?
I think I found out by radio. Possibly might have been listening to WBAI radio at the time, not by the television. Found out about the assassination of Oswald by television. I was watching it actually when he was assassinated. Oswald, when he was shot by Jack Ruby.
Yeah. I mean,
But we both were working at 14th Street, right?
Yes,
When
Kennedy was assassinated.
when Kennedy was assassinated.
You were working that day?
Yes, but I wasn't in production then. I was working at for the prop department, and Nathan was working for the Scenic Arts department.
So where were you when you heard?
18th Street.
So
We
you
were
were
both working there.
Yeah. The television coverage was pretty much nonstop in those days following
yes,
that.
it was.
Yeah. Did you have an urge to be there, to be on the scene, to be part of that?
No,
or?
I had no urge for that. As I say, I was just a clerk then, doing prop billing. But I was a big admirer of Kennedy. I was very upset, and I'm still to this day upset over that. I also tie it in with my political beliefs that I never believed from day one. Well, I don't know if that's not a little bit of an exaggeration, and I don't want to exaggerate, but I was skeptical from day one that Oswald was the lone assassin. And now I'm totally convinced that he was not the assassin at all. He might have been part of the equation, but he was not the assassin.
And with Robert Kennedy was assassinated too. Were you working
don't
on that?
claim to know as much about that. I'm equally concerned because I was an admirer of Robert Kennedy also, but I don't know. I don't know how to judge that. But the other JFK, I believe, was not assassinated by Oswald.
Did you have any access to anything we don't know about?
Did I have any?
Yeah, through people who
No,
had
no,
footage
no. I
or-
don't claim to have any special access to anything. I just read a lot, and I try to not read stuff that are written by, you know, conspiracy theorists that are not too bright or that kind of thing, or just into the notion of conspiracy for the sake of conspiracy.
Mm.
I believe that. I personally believe that and you could strike this if you want, that it's your call, but I personally believe JFK was assassinated by a coalition of rogue, I use the word rogue, very important that rogue be there, rogue CIA agents, Cuban exiles, and organized crime. Because there were the three groups who benefited by that assassination, because Kennedy was very opposed to the Bay of Pigs invasion and reluctantly agreed to it.
Right.
And actually referred to the CIA as a bunch of bastards. He used that term. And I will smatter them into 1,000 pieces. Well, and then fired Allen Dulles. Well, you can't have the President of the United States talking that way about the CIA. I happen to believe he was right, but...
Yeah.
And I'll put it in a nutshell. Kennedy was opposed to American imperialism, which he should be, as a constitutional president. The United States is supposedly not supposed to be an imperialist country. When I was in the Army, I didn't take an oath to defend American exceptionalism or American imperialism. I took an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States. So that's my belief about that.
Yeah.
And if you look at his records of his addresses to graduating students and all, he always tried to steer the country away from imperialism. He had his faults, of course. Marilyn Monroe and all of that stuff, whatever, I don't know. But.
Well, I mean, it's so interesting, with your background and your beliefs, the 68 presidential primaries and election year was very raucous, full of unrest, rioting. It was a time of great discord, and television was kind of front and center in capturing that unrest.
And it did a
throughout the
good
country.
job then, a pretty good job, much better job than it does now. The whole Vietnam War, too, also was covered pretty well. I remember John Alpert, I don't know if you know who he is, but he was an independent journalist. I mean, a really independent, left-wing journalist, by the way, in the 60s, that would provide, and I was involved in it. I wasn't involved with him, but I would frequently AD shows in which the coverage he did in Vietnam, which was totally independent, would get on the air on nightly news. He would feed it to us or send it to us, and we would put it on the air. That would never happen today. Never.
Did a part of you want to be part of the television mechanism that was front and center in '68? Did you want to go to the Democratic National Convention?
No. I didn't care whether I went or whether I didn't go.
Okay.
I was just selected and I went. And, I made the best of it. But no, I didn't try to do it. I never tried to do any shows, actually, including Saturday Night Live. I didn't even want to do Saturday Night Live because I didn't want the hours.
Yeah, I know. We'll get to that.
But Snyder had gone away, and I felt I shouldn't turn Davy down. So I wound up accepting it.
We'll get to SNL in a bit, but in '68, you were at the convention. Where were you actually situated, and what was your role in coverage?
I think I wasn't the principal. I was at convention center for sure. On all the conventions, I was always at convention center and not at a sub-unit somewhere else. We would have mobile units all throughout the whole city, and a lot of the ADs would be assigned there with a director there, and then we would feed into the main. I was there in the main center. I don't know if I was the principal AD, or I was taking feeds in, or coordinating from the remotes. I can't recall. That's when I was an AD, but most of the time, most of the conventions, I was on the floor with Edwin Newman. Edwin Newman was the guy they always assigned me to. Edwin Newman. He liked to work with me.
He was a director or a
No,
commentator?
Edwin Newman was a commentator, one of the better commentators.
So how did you interact with him? Was it just him and you on the floor?
Well, he would be roving throughout the floor when all that, commotion goes on with the delegates, and then he would find somebody that, and report back to his bosses, and they'd say, yeah, let's do a spot with that person. And then I would ready them, And the director would tell me, well, get Newman and put him in such and such a spot and stand by, we're coming to you, and they'd take us and I'd cue him, cue Newman. And then he'd say, here I am in convention hall with whoever. And then I'd count him out. A lot of times they didn't want him to do more than a few minutes and show him the cues, 1 minute, 30 seconds, count him out, and then he'd throw it somewhere else.
What kind of technology were you using at the time to communicate to the director?
They were like sophisticated headsets that were, RF stuff that I could talk back to them in this case, They would hear me, the AD. I was usually on with the ADs.
Got it. So it was you, a cameraman, and Edward?
Yeah, cameraman, small camera like that. And I'd be on usually with the AD. I was working with the director and the principal. We built a complete control room. They weren't in trucks. They were right up there in Convention Center.
How involved were you with the cameras and the technology? I mean,
I'm sorry?
How involved were you with the cameras and the technology? Are you a pretty technical guy?
No,
or?
not technical at all. No, not at all. I have trouble changing batteries and stuff like that.
So who do you have to rely on and trust in those situations?
Oh, there's all kinds of audio assist there and people to assist you about anything. Like, you just say I need a maintenance guy here or something, or I need technical assistance, and they were all over the place.
So for the 68 convention, when the chaos was starting to erupt and the violence was starting to happen on the floor, where were you and what was your job? Just any recollections you have?
Well, a lot of that happened on the streets. And I don't recall doing anything on the streets or covering any of the riots or the demonstrations. I think I happened to be in close proximity to Dick Gregory leading a march in which there were maybe a half a mile of young people that he was leading to he claims to his home, because he was stopped by the police. And the police said to him, politely, Mr. Gregory, you can't go past this point. There's no... And he says, but I'm going home. And they said, well, of course you can go home. He says, and these are my guests. And he pointed to all the kids in back of him that were there, demonstrating. Of course, they didn't fall for that, but that's something that I remember taking place.
So would you go out and try and find protesters and interview them, or would you?
No, those were decisions made by journalists and people, not me.
But were you doing the remotes too? Were you mostly inside?
I think I was mostly inside the convention center all the time.
And was it taped? Were you taped or were you live?
There were times when we would tape things and then send them to be integrated later in the evening report, and there were times when we were live.
Was there anything you encountered that you hadn't encountered before in those situations that you had to kind of wing on the spot?
I encountered a demonstrator at the end of the convention when we were getting ready to leave that was a McCarthyite young lady who came over to me and saw my case with an NBC sticker on it and asked me if I was with NBC, and I said, yes, I am. She said, "Do you mind if I stay with you? Because I'm terribly frightened right now. The police just raided our room. And I'm terrified that they're going to come and beat me or something." And I said, "Of course you can stay with me. Absolutely. Don't worry about it. Nobody will bother you." And she stayed with me for a little bit until it looked like nobody was going to bother her, and then left. I do remember that.
But you never were afraid of people lashing out at you in the press?
No.
And
No, I was never threatened by anybody, but I don't say this macho like, but I don't frighten easily. It's just because of the way I grew up and everything. I just don't. Not that I can't be frightened. Of course I can if somebody poses a real threat to me. But in general, I don't fight. I don't get easily frightened.
Hmm.
But I felt bad for this young lady. And they were obviously very idealistic people, but the police didn't have any understanding about them. I mean, some did. Some police officers did. There was always exceptions, and not all police officers are brutes. But that all helped to radicalize me to the left, more to the left.
do you think the NBC coverage was fair?
I thought it was a lot fairer then than it is now. I'm absolutely, yeah, the answer is yes, especially, telling you about John Albert and the fact that they were allowed an independent guy like him. He was very to the left. All his stuff was to the left. And they allowed his stuff on nightly news, yeah. And I think the people like Ed Newman, Chad Huntley, Dave Brinkley, Frank McGee, they were much better journalists than what we have today. That, Rachel Maddow, whom I don't consider to be a journalist at all. Just a talking head for left-wing propaganda, which is not even left-wing propaganda, actually. It's just propaganda. That's the way I see it.
Why didn't you stay in the news unit then? You seem like you.
Well, I had no editorial input of any kind.
But just to be part of it, just to, the politics interested you. So I'm surprised you didn't want to stay in the arena.
No, I did news when I was assigned to do it. I remember editing a segment on Fidel Castro for the news department under Reuben Frank, who was do you know that name?
We interviewed him, yeah.
You interviewed Reuben?
I didn't, but yes, we have
Really?
interviewed him. Mm-hmm.
I worked a lot with him. He was a very nice man, and this was 2-inch tape, and we were on the 5th floor editing, and it was a segment on Fidel Castro. I don't remember the segment, but at the end, it was time for the commercial. And I said to Reuben, I need a bumper to get to commercial. What bumper do you want to use? And the bumper he gave me said, "And the CIA tried to assassinate Fidel, and they tried, and they tried, and they tried, ... fade to black." That's where the commercial went. And I put that in for NBC News.
Wow.
Of course, I agreed with it, but
That's bold.
we know that historically they did make many attempts of Fidel's. That can't be disputed. But
Yeah. Editing is that something that typically the ADs were involved in, was editing the show? We talked off camera about that, but how did you learn how to edit?
I personally did a lot of editing. ADs and directors edit. Nobody else. I mean, we don't make the editorial judgments, but we make the cutting judgments and to make it look right.
Meaning timed right, or?
Well, time's part of it, but basically continuity, and it has to cut right, and it has to look right, and pace right. Too much cutting is not good. Depends on what you're editing also. If you're editing, I used to edit the Mass. I did the Midnight Mass a lot. That was the easiest edit a 10-year-old could make that edit. Because it went over so long, the Midnight Mass, and then you had to cut it. There was one cut, and you had it in time. All you did was edit the communion. Because the communion went on for a long time. They'd say, well, I need 15 minutes here. Okay. You just find a place, find a cutaway shot, bang, make one edit. Shows in time.
What about the more complex edits you did with like
Oh,
composite editing?
complex edits could be difficult. I did a lot of complex edits. Some of them were, I was pretty proud of. I did one with the Tom Hanks show.
The Tom Hanks show?
Yeah, when Hanks hosted Saturday Night Live. And I got a note from the writer. In a monologue, he did a sing and dance bit, and then he leaped off the stage right, and leaped off, jumped up high in the air, landed, and ran to the control room. Walked into the control room, they had a camera in there, and he did a beat with me and Davey. For some reason, the writer or the producer liked the dress better of that beat. Not the actual monologue, the singing and dancing, that was fine for air. But when he leaped off, but I couldn't find a way to get over there. And the editor I was working with said, you know, how are we going to make this edit? There's no place we can get in here. And for some reason, I was able to make it in midair. He leaped off, and then having the Avid and the Final Cut, we can go frame by frame. So
Did he jump so high he was like out of frame or something?
No, he wasn't out of the frame. I made a frame-to-frame edit of him in the middle of the leap.
Wow. Legs in the same place and
everything? Like in this, it couldn't, I mean, maybe if you played with it to the frame, you could see it, but in real time, you never noticed the edit, and you didn't. Because I couldn't do an edit like that. I wouldn't do an edit like that. The one that throw me off the show. But it worked. And so when he leaped off the stage, he was in air. When he landed on the ground, he was in dress. And then I didn't have to do any more editing after that. He ran into the control room and everything. All the cuts were fine with that. So I remember making that edit.
But you're not technical, so how did you learn how to even do
Well, that's
edits?
visual. That's not technical.
Yeah, but you're still, there's a machine
No, I haven't
involved.
edited it. The editor did that part. He was a good editor, too.
But you just told him, you direct the editor.
Yeah, and I would have him move it for me, you know. Mm-hmm. Move it a frame to the right, move it a frame to the left, this, that, you know. And then give him the cut, and he was good. Very good editor. Mm. There was one other, too, that was... I once did an edit that had something to do with Lorne getting prissy about it, that he wasn't told that they made a change, and he was very annoyed at it, and he wanted it back to air, something, and the edit was almost impossible to do. And I kept telling the associate producer, I can't do this edit. Who cares it's Lorne? We can't do a bad edit because it's Lorne Michaels. Either do dress or air, that's all. Simple as that. Put dress or air in. Oh, you got to make it work, because we were able to make it work with this guy, Mike. But we did it. We made an edit to the same camera in dress, which is almost an impossibility. We were able to do an internal edit within the shot that matched. Don't ask me to explain it because I can't. It's so long ago, but something that you would never think could happen, but it did happen. But generally, edits are not that difficult, you know. But Lorne would give us a hard time about when he wanted something, he wanted it.
Yeah, how many impossible requests would come down from Lauren that you said this can't be done, but that it would happen? Is that like a daily, weekly occurrence?
Nah, not that many, because either you wouldn't tell him that and you'd figure a way to get it done, or something. I don't know. Not really. I can't recall ever having to not do something he wanted done.
There's a lot of people you worked with on SNL, which we'll get to, that you worked with much earlier, like Dick Ebersol. You worked at NBC Sports. Can you talk about your time at NBC Sports and what you covered?
Well, I worked with Ebersol
before that?
after when he was with sports. Before that, I had never worked with him. I had never worked with Ebersol before I worked with him on Saturday Night Live.
Oh, okay. So the sports.
I mean, I
team
knew
lead.
of him and all. I mean, I might have. No, I don't think I ever did.
What about Don Pardo?
Don, I worked with a lot. Don, I became very tight with Don. I got to love him, and he was like, that was like a whole nother aspect of my career, working with him. We became very friendly. I would drive him to work, drive him back, because we would do all those Bob Stewart shows. 5 shows, 3 times a week, you know.
He was announcing all of the
He
shows.
was announcing, and
3 in a match and
3 in a match,
jackpot,
jackpot.
winning
And
streak.
he's like, I don't know how to explain Pardo, but was a really unique guy, very talented, and misunderstood in many ways. I mean, people had all these stereotype ideas about what he thought and who he was, and they were all wrong if you really knew him. Like that he was cheap. He was frugal, but he wasn't cheap. He was incredibly honest, like, and would never gone after anybody else's work. I mean, was very honest with his managers that they would get their share. Mm. I believe this to be a true story, although I couldn't verify it. But I was told that he was at a party once and he inadvertently ran into an agency guy that asked him to do an AT&T commercial, 30-second commercial, and he would pay him $10,000 for the 30-second commercial. This is years ago, many years ago. And Don said, yeah, okay. And then he went home, and within a couple of days, he called his manager, and he said to his manager, you know, by the way, I was at a party and met this guy, and I'm going to do a, you know, call him and set it up. I'm going to do a 30-second spot for him for $10,000. And this manager said, no, you're not. You're not doing it for 10. $50,000. And he called the guy up, and the guy said, okay, I'll pay $50,000. That's what they paid him, $50,000. Wow. But Pardo was ready to do it for 30. And if he were a little corrupt, he probably didn't even have to tell his agent anything, but he wasn't that way. Also, when Letterman wanted him to replace their announcer, Bill Wendell, and he had no idea. He went in, he was asked to go and see the producer. He went in, said, we'd like to, he said, no, isn't that Bill Wendell's job? He said, I don't go after anybody else's work. And he wouldn't take it. Mm. That's true story. Mm. A funny guy.
Yeah. What do you think his legacy will be in television history as an announcer, Pardo?
His legacy? I don't know. She knows him well. What? I don't know. But, you know, I was privileged to be the only guy Lorne wanted to record him when he refused to come in live every week. At a certain point, he said to Lorne, got to get another announcer, I'm not coming in. And Lorne said, no, you got to come in, Don. He said, nope, I'm not doing it. He says, well, we'll record you in Arizona. So we did, and Lorne wanted me to record him, so I would record him every week on a Friday night.
You'd go?
No, I didn't go to Arizona. I did it from New York. At the time, I was still working full-time for them. Uh-huh. And I'd go down on Friday night from the editing room, and I'd hook up with, I set the whole thing up with an audio guy and everything in Arizona, and I would record him. And he's in his 90s now, and it was not easy to record him. And I was up against it with time, because the cast would be coming in to do voiceovers and stuff, and Dickie, the guy who sent us, he was always rushing me, you know, and I'd be fighting with him. I'd say, don't be telling me what takes I'm going to buy and not buy. He'd say, it's good enough, you know. My big fear was that Lorne would hear it in dress and go to Kenny and say, what's it with Bobby Caminiti? Why is he buying this bad reading, you know? And what was I supposed to do now? Re-record him from Arizona between dress and hair? It's like an impossible thing to do. So I would have to like be patient with him and you know he'd say, "How's that, Bob?" And I'd say, "It's great, Tom. Give me another one." And then I'd hear back in my ear, "Well, if it's great, why are you asking me to do another one?" You know, that kind of thing. I can't mimic his voice, but you can. I'd say, "Well, you know, like Mike Gargiulo used to say, for safety." You know, he said for safety, meaning technically we might lose it. "Okay, Bob, you're the boss." That's what he would say to me. In fact. And one day,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
Mike Gargiulo was the director on those game shows, the Bob Stewart.
Yeah,
game
Gargiulo
show.
used to say, "Do another one for
safety."
Yeah, he was another piece of work, Gargiulo. That guy made a fortune doing game show television. That's all he did too, was direct. Never got involved in anything else. He'd be out the door and leave me with the show to edit it or something.
Would he say that because he didn't have the take, and that's how he would get Pardo to do it again, for safety? Was that like his?
No, he
gimmick?
never recorded Pardo. I used to do it all, but I did it more for Saturday Night Live than for the game shows. But on occasion, I'd have to re-record him because he would, and he had a habit of coughing. He just was about to cue him. We're fading up, and he'd go, "Oh, oh," and I'd say, "Jesus, you know." Of course, they were tape shows, but then I'd have to get rid of that or something, you know. But I loved Pardo. He could do no wrong.
Yeah, unmistakable.
And he was funny.
Yeah.
I heard a story that he was on his roof one day cleaning leaves. He was cheap that way. He didn't like to pay anybody to do anything. And kids came by, and the neighborhood kids, and they know who he is, and they shouted up to him, "Hey, Mr. Pardo, Mr. Pardo, say it, say it." "Say what?" "Say it, you know." And he'd go, "Live from New York, it's Saturday night." He almost fall off the roof or something like that. Another time he broke his leg or something, and he's in a cast. There's a big snowstorm. He used to wait for me when I had edits. When I was the principal AD, I had to edit sometimes for the West Coast. And I'd say to Don, "Don, go home on your own because I got to edit. You know, I got to be an hour, maybe more. I got to edit for the West Coast." "Oh, I don't care, Bob. I'm coming down to the edit room. I'll sit there with you while you edit. I want to go home with you." So one day, there's this massive snowstorm. Kenny didn't even want us to go home. Kenny Mong, the coordinator, says, "We'll put you in a hotel. We don't want to stay in any hotel. We're going home." So we get in the car, and he talks up a storm with the drivers. They're always from Pakistan or India or whatever. He's asking them a million questions. And we get to his house in Demorest. He gets out of the car, and he's got crutches, and his leg snow is like this high. And I say, "Don." He says, "No, don't wait here. Don't worry, I'm going to be fine." He says, "Go, just go." I said, "No, I got to make sure you get in the house." "No way." He says, "Just get out of here." So we leave. But I get a half a mile away, and I'm feeling very guilty. I said, "How can I leave this guy? He's old." He was pretty old then, too. I mean, so I asked the driver if he would go back. He said, "Sure." We go back, and he's shoveling snow. He's shoveling his driveway out.
On crutches?
On crutches. True story.
Amazing. Before we get more into, we have a lot to talk about SNL, but there's one show I want to talk about before that, The Tomorrow Show. So can you talk about what year you joined The Tomorrow Show, how that came about?
Well, actually, The Tomorrow Show, I had been doing some sports, but not as a sports AD, just now and then.
Like Wimbledon you did, right? The coverage of Wimbledon?
Well, I did Wimbledon every year for 10 years in a row. I did the control for it, not the London, but the control was more difficult than the London.
Why is that?
Well, because it would be, first of all, 6 hours on the air. They were the same in London. They were 6 hours on the air because I was taking them live. But the sales department would sell it so that they would oversell it to make revenue. But they were only permitted to do 1-minute commercials during the live event. So when the live event would end, especially if it would end early, they would have a ton of commercials that were sold that had to air. So you would air those by playing retapes. And they were always complicated because they'd be edited in England. They'd be sent to us. I'd have 5, 6 machines down there with a guy we called the axe murderer, who was an AD that was so grumpy, and we always referred to him as the axe murderer. And he was in charge of taking the feeds, and he would assign the machines to me, and then I would roll them. And we used to fight too, because he would set cues that I didn't like. I'd change the cues, and he'd yell at me about changing these cues and stuff like that. But in any event, I forgot now the point I was trying to make. What was I saying?
Well, why it was more difficult to be in the control room for Wimbledon?
It was difficult because you would be told, you'd do a commercial and then you'd be told what the following would be, and you wouldn't be able to get it all together before they'd be ready to give you the roll cue to roll. So you were always scrambling, like, and you're telling a guy in a card machine, give me position 15D, 8A, and 9B, and the guy would have to do that, like go get 9A, 9B, put them all together as an island, and you hope you get it in time because the segment that you'd be coming to an end, and you had to go somewhere. So that kind of stuff was like a pain in the neck. But Wimbledon, it was a fun show to do, and you were on the air for a long time, for 6 hours straight, actually.
Wow.
You didn't even get up to go to the boys' room.
How do you personally, are you happy in that kind of a schedule? I mean, are you kind of just go kind of a guy? You don't need breaks.
Well,
the
energy would be good, and you'd like to get it. A lot of it was hairy, and if you pulled it off, there was a certain satisfaction to it.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't anything complex or anything like that, but you had to be on top of it. And if you weren't, you'd have outages on the air and you'd have to answer for it.
Mm. Right.
But they pretty much went well. And I had good people on the other side, good ADs that, they were New York ADs that were sent there.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew them, and, you got a lot of support from them. If you didn't quite understand something, they'd explain it. And they'd give you all the details about cross rolls and stuff. And then the axe murderer would cross rolls are when you roll a certain segment, but they might want to take a lead in or a conclusion of it from another piece of tape. So they send you 2 pieces of tape, and then you have to cross roll from one tape to the other to get the right ending.
I got you. Okay. So you were getting to how you got to the Tomorrow Show when it moved to New York in, I think, 74?
So phone calls were being made from George Paul, and she was taking them, and I never returned the calls. One day I was in a bathtub or something, and she came and said, this guy again, will you talk to him? And I said, yeah, of course, because I was there. And he identified himself. I didn't really know him. I knew his name, but I had never met him.
He was the director.
He was director. Very crazy man. Totally crazy. And but a very good director. And he said, the Tomorrow Show is moving to New York. I know you do sports, but I want you to be the AD because Ricky Carson doesn't want to come to New York. That was Johnny's son. He had AD'd the show there. And I knew Ricky. And I liked Ricky Carson. I liked him a lot, actually. He was nothing like his father, whom I did not like. And Ricky didn't want to go, so I said, yeah, I'll do the show, I didn't have a show at the time, and I just was doing different things. And that's how I got the Tomorrow Show.
In your role
and
as
George, would take me everywhere. He wouldn't go anywhere without me. Charles Manson, we're going to Sacramento to do Charles Manson. I said, what do you need me there for? He said, no, you're coming. He liked me to go everywhere with him.
You told me a little bit about that off camera too, the Charles Manson day.
Charles Manson was a very interesting event for me.
What did you have to do to prepare for that shot? It was inside the prison. He was
Inside Vacaville State Prison. We went there, we flew there. It was a very small crew. Me, the director, producer didn't even go, Pamela Burke. I think we hired a local crew, so we didn't take any lighting or anything. Maybe they were from Burbank, I don't know. Burbank's not that far, right, from Sacramento?
Yeah, a couple hours.
I can't recall. Yeah. And we were told how we were to dress and how we were to behave because
how you were to dress because what?
Yeah, they wanted us to dress in a nondescript way, whatever that means. And that was important because it would incite the inmates. But oddly enough, it wasn't a maximum security prison. It was considered a rehabilitation center. And when you walk down the halls, all the, the officers all had names of people, PhD in psychology, this, that, and the other thing. And I started chatting with the PR guy that was in charge of us, because I'm always curious about these things. I said, well, does it work? He says, no, it doesn't. He says they think it works, and all these shrinks come here and tell us this guy's definitely rehabilitated, and we let him out. Within 6 months, he's back for the same crime or worse. Not in every last case, but in general, it doesn't work, he said.
What do you think of Manson when you...
He was pretty much what I expected him to be. He was a little tiny guy with a swastika here. And I got a good look at the swastika because we were waiting for him to come to be brought in by his guard. And I was just wandering around there, and I heard this big knocking on a door. And I walked to the end of the hallway, and there was a typical prison door with a little window, like, I don't know, maybe, the size of that painting there, that drawing. And not with the frame, but just the glass part. And there his head was up against that. Like I had this tight shot of his head, and I could see the swastika. And in the back of him was a guard that I remember looked like my son, like he was about the age of my son. And Chris was maybe 12 or something at that time, very young. And he asked for he shouted through the door asking for the PR guy who had gone away somewhere and told us he would be back in an hour. So he couldn't come in. The guard didn't have keys to that. So I just said, he's not here, and I walked away. And then I guess that guard brought him back to wherever he came from. And about 20 minutes later, he came in. Went up to everybody and extended his hand, including me, and I shook his hand. I didn't want to shake his hand, but I did, because his hand instinctively went out. Actually, everybody shook his hand except one person who said, I don't shake your hand. I won't shake your hand.
I mean,
I didn't say to him, hey, Charlie, nice to meet you. I didn't.
Right.
I shook his hand and I walked away.
Did that swastika have an impact on you?
No.
No.
It had no impact on me whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
I looked at it like...
costume almost, or?
I didn't feel any compassion for him or any sympathy for him in any way. I was emotionless about it. I don't know if I might have regretted it, but and if I did, I did, but only in a minor way. I didn't feel glad that I shook his hand. It was like neutral.
How do you think Tom Snyder handled that interview? What do you think in general about his interview style and how he approached Manson that day?
I think for the most part, and especially the part that made air, Tom was very professional. But there were times later that I think that he wasn't.
His
that,
emotions came through, or
yeah, and yeah, I think so, and his anger. And of course, it's understandable. It's human to think that way, but on the other hand, he's a journalist and he's conducting an interview that we wanted to do. We capitalized on that. That had all come about because of his cellmate. He had a cellmate that was released from prison, and he was able to get Manson to. He wrote a book on Manson, and he was able to get Manson to agree to do the interview, and that it would be good publicity. I don't know if Manson made any money on the book. I really don't know. But I mean, Tom was fine, but there were moments, of course, which none of that made air. It was edited out. I edited it with George.
yeah, you said.
But George made all the editorial, judgments about what would be and what would be. I guess along with Pamela Burke, who was Tom's producer. Mm-hmm. And again, another highly unusual woman that was just fabulous to work for. Just fabulous.
Yeah, there were a couple shows, I mean, he would get visibly angry with the guest. The one with John Lydon, Johnny Rotten.
Yeah.
I mean, was that just expected and like let him go, or would director ever give Tom notes like calm down?
No, the director would never give those kind of notes. Producers would.
During the taping.
Yeah, that's a note like that. A director will give note to talent regarding, performance or stage direction regarding in relationship to camera, but never an editorial note. That would come from the producer. Unless they were producer directors, there is such a thing as that, where they wear both hats. But otherwise, that's the province of a producer.
Were there a lot of battles on that set between Tom and the producers?
Not that I was aware of. Probably were that I wasn't privy to. I know that Tom was not happy when Rona Barrett joined the show. He did not like her, and he didn't make any bones about it. And I wound up making a lot of money on it because he refused to work with her. So her part was done in California, and he wouldn't even work with her from California live. He just didn't. So I was told, you have to figure the show minus Rona. So I'd call California every morning, Burbank. I'm going to talk to my counterpart there and say, well, what's the Barrett segment going to be this week, today? And he'd tell me 4 minutes and 10 seconds or whatever, 5 minutes, whatever. And then there was a promo that I had to edit in too, that was 30 seconds long. And then I'd do the New York segment at 5 o'clock and minus the show, that amount. And then recomposite it at night and put everything together and turn it over for air. So I have this long day, overtime every day.
Other than that, I mean, what were your daily roles on the set of that show? And how was it, different from other shows you'd worked on?
Well, that was combination talk and sub-entertainment. We had music on, we had some group that blew up a car or something, and the special effects was figured wrong or something, and I think it affected a news show that was going on the air downstairs. George Paul was considered to be like insane. I even named him. I named him Spadafucili, the assassin in Rigoletto, and he loved the name so much that he took it as a credit. he cracked up when he heard it. I said, what are you, Sparafuccio? I said to him, Sparafuccio, what's that? I said, that's the assassin in Rigoletto. I love that name. He just, he took it that night as directed by Sparafucci. He was a character.
How did
But
you
he was a
interact?
very good director.
Yeah, how did you interact with him? How much would he leave to you? What were your
Well, he wanted me to direct the show. He didn't trust any other director. But I didn't want to direct it. I only directed one show, and then he wanted to do that. And they brought in a guy by the name of Norman Paul, who was an AD, but he directed in news, and he directed one show, and George said, I don't want that guy to ever direct the show again. And when I go away, go to Burbank, you're going to direct the show. I said, I don't want to direct the show. You're going to do it. So he forced me to do it. I did it. And the guest host, Tom didn't do that show. He was with Paul George somewhere in the West Coast. Edwin Newman did it. And I had worked a lot with Edwin Newman, but I had never directed him. I just worked with him as a stage manager on the conventions. And I did the show, and the guest host, the primary guest, was the thalidomide boy that had, his mother had been given thalidomide, and he was born a torso like 18 inches. And he was a very smart kid, but it was a depressing show to direct. But I did it because George insisted I had to do it.
So would part of your role be directing the guests and prepping them and doing
I didn't prep them. They were
or?
prepped by the associate producers and the producers regarding what was going to be asked. I just directed the interview and we did it like a live show. I didn't do it in bits and pieces. We did it live, in real time. I had an AD that worked with me, a guy by the name of Roger Wolf, very good AD. And we did it in one shot. I had 4 cameras.
It's 4 cameras.
I think I had 4 cameras, if I'm not mistaken. Definitely 3. It might have been 4. George liked to cut a lot, and he liked to have a lot of cameras, so it might have been 3, but it was definitely 3 or 4. I think it was 4 cameras.
Did that change when the format of the show was expanded and there was a live audience? Did that change the setup?
Yeah, it did. It did expand. I think probably previous to that they had 3, and then when they started doing music and stuff like that, they had 4. I didn't have any music on this show. No musical guest. It was just him. And there was one other guest after him. He was the primary guest. I can't recall who the guest was. And Newman, of course, was good.
But you didn't enjoy directing? You didn't want to go into
I
that?
never enjoyed directing that much because it used to make me nervous because producers were always a pain in the neck and yelling and screaming, and I preferred to do the AD job.
Do you remember the episode that the Not Ready for Primetime Players came out with Lorne Michaels and he interviewed them?
Tom Snyder? I did see that. I wasn't involved in that.
You weren't involved
anyway,
then?
no.
Oh, so you didn't meet Lorne then?
I hadn't met him yet because that was the first show, but I did work two shows with the original cast. I worked Chris Christopherson from 8H, and I worked Karen Black from Brooklyn.
Were you AD? on
Yeah,
the set?
because Fadovich had some kind of major personal event he had to take care of, or one of them might have been a death in the family, and his father passed away or something like that, so I had to do the show. And I think that was, I don't remember which show that was, whether it was Chris Christopherson, which we did from 8H, and Karen Black, which we did from Brooklyn. And that was a pain in the neck to do the show from Brooklyn.
Why?
But the news department threw us out. They were covering presidential election, and they just said, oh, goodbye. They took the studio.
Was that in 80 then? Which presidential election?
It was in the 70s.
76?
Because in the 80s, I was already then principal AD. Fatovich had quit.
81, I think, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You moved over. Who were just last on the Tomorrow Show? Are there any other really memorable or difficult or challenging guests that you recall working with? Kiss was there, kind of inebriated.
Kiss?
The band Kiss, Ace Frehley.
I must have been there, but I can't recall that.
John Lennon's last televised interview. Were you there for that?
What year was that?
That was 75, April 75.
No.
Oh, you weren't on the show anymore?
No, I hadn't joined the show yet permanently.
Oh, I thought it was
Only-
74 you joined the show. No?
No, I joined in the 80, 81 season or 81,
Oh, no, not
82.
SNL. I'm talking about Tomorrow Show.
Oh, was that a Burbank show or was that done from New York?
New
Then I
York.
must have done it,
Yeah.
but I can't recall.
So there's no other memorable guests from Tomorrow Show you remember working with? No Harvey Keitels of the Tomorrow Show?
No. No, my mind just draws a blank. I can't. It's funny how I can't remember.
Well, why did you leave the Tomorrow Show?
I didn't. The show went off the air.
So you left when the show ended?
The show ended. I was no longer on the air. And I wanted to do Letterman. But Fatovich, the principal AD on Saturday Night Live, didn't want the hours anymore of Saturday Night Live. He hated the hours. So he had more pull than I did with Hal Gurney, because they had worked the Jack Parr show together.
Right.
And Hal hired him. I didn't try to get it. I didn't try anything. I was just figuring, well, wherever they put me, they put me.
So
And then
Tomorrow
so-
Show ends and SNL, there's an opening. And this is
Well,
the,
Fatovich quits, and Davey said to Kenny Mung, I want Bob. Well, Kenny Mung wasn't there at the time. He says, I want Bobby Caminiti to be the AD.
so this is the 81 season, does that sound
Yeah.
right? And Ebersol was the producer?
Yeah.
And so you hadn't worked with Ebersol before either?
No, just Lorne on the two I did in the 70s. But Lorne was gone
Right,
then.
Lauren was gone. And you hadn't worked with Dave Wilson previously, or had you?
Not as his AD. I worked with him, equal to him on certain things where
As
we
a
were both
state-
ADs.
Yeah.
And I observed him on local news and stuff like that. But I hadn't worked with him as my director.
Do you know why he thought you'd be good for that job? Why Dave wanted you?
I know he might have wanted me because I had done a lot of live television, and he knew I had been a film AD and that I was good with the network, because the SNL AD job works a lot with the network, the configuration of the NBC television network. And
You mean with Broadway Video and with all the...
no. Broadway Video have nothing to do with it. It's just that it's an operationally, as well as production-wise, it's operationally complex. The Saturday Night Live and the way it configures to the network, even more so now than then, because we go across the board now live, with some minor areas where we're on a small kind of a delay. But
Oh, you mean with both coasts?
I thought he would, because in those days we rolled our own commercials and everything, and he wanted an AD in which he wouldn't have to worry about that. Like if you notice on that thing, I'm on headsets while I'm talking to sound effects, talking to music, and I'm talking to the control AD, which could make or break us. They could take us off the air if they screw up. So they have to be given correct orders, correct cues, stuff like that. And he didn't want to be bothered with that, so that he could judge, devote time to the more creative aspects of the show, like the cast and the blocking of the camera, the shots, and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And that he could rely on me to handle music, sound effects, the network regarding commercial controls and stuff, how the control works with us and integrates with us. I think. I don't know why he wanted me, really, but he knew me.
Was that not were all of those things that you just mentioned not standard for shows at that time? So other ADs wouldn't be as familiar with how to do roll-ins and things like that?
Well, no, not necessarily. There were other ADs equally as competent to do that as me there, especially the ones that had worked in film. Fadovich was one, obviously, because he had done it before me. Uh, a lot of them, actually. All the ones that had worked in film. There were a lot of women ADs, too. A lot of them that were very good. And directors, by the way. We had a lot of women directors and ADs in news. Enid Roth, Eleanor Yackel, Susan Kramer, a ton of them. There were a lot of women working then, in the 60s, I'm talking about, as ADs and directors. And they were good to work with, too. They were good. And they were tough. They were like Enid was very tough. Enid would yell at producers if they opened their mouth and tell them to shut the F up back there, you know. Stuff like that. And the women took good care of me, too. Enid and Marilyn Jacobs.
Yeah.
Marilyn Jacobs, he played a major role in me getting involved with the Directors Guild and Labor Affairs.
At SNL, was it more men than women though on the stage crew and in the control room at the time you joined?
Well, one of the leading people in control of everything. We used to call her. What do we call Audrey? Audrey was like second in command to Lorne. Nobody could talk to Lorne except through Audrey. She was a British lady.
Yeah, she had a lot of power.
He had a tremendous amount of power. What was her last name? She was British. And she was funny. She was almost like, I don't know how to describe Audrey.
Yeah, I'm looking. What was her
She
role?
was boss. What the hell was Audrey's last name?
I'm looking. Don't think I have it. I don't know. Was she like the Ken among of the time?
Ah, she was even more powerful than Ken. Ken came in and replaced her. But she didn't work for NBC. She worked for Lorne. And then I think that she worked for the show. NBC didn't want that. They wanted a liaison between the interest of the owners of the show and the powerful executive producer. I think. I can't be sure I'm right about that.
What was different about...
Audrey Dickman.
Oh.
Audrey Dickman.
There we go. Knew you'd get it. What was different about... SNL breaks the rules in a lot of ways, but...
Yeah, they do.
What was different to you about coming in to this live sketch comedy show? How was it different from sports, soaps, game shows, all the stuff you'd done before? What was unique about it?
It's a good question. The difference is that the rules that applied out to other shows didn't apply there. They were like really different. Lorne was different. The players were different. Especially the original cast, whom I only worked twice with, but they were definitely independent and didn't hold back. Lorne had a lot of, in my opinion, creative control because I think he got along very well with the executive. What was the executive's name?
Brandon Tartikoff?
Yes, thank you, Brandon Tartikoff. My feeling is they had complete creative compatibility in that even though he was the executive in charge, he left Lorne alone, in my opinion. Now, I can't be certain I'm right about this. It isn't that I had, but my sense was that. Because I'm not stupid. I'm there. I can see what goes on. Maybe I am stupid, but I just had the feeling that Lorne had a lot of power and that all of this was fine with Brandon.
But at the time you joined, Lauren wasn't there. So, but that had
No,
carried that.
no, that's true. But I think that he probably had the same for Eversole, because it's my understanding that Eversole played a lot in developing the show also. Am I right or wrong about that? Yeah.
No, I think that's definitely true.
Yeah.
It was definitely a different. It seems like there was a rotation out of a lot of the crew who had been there from the first show, although a couple stayed when Lauren left and then came back in 85, was it, that Lauren came back? And what was that like when he came back? Because you were on the show.
Yeah, I was there.
Did a lot of the.
But I knew him because of the two previous shows I did with him in the 70s.
Right.
I didn't know him that well. I had no problem when he came back. I liked Eversole. I liked Lauren.
What was different with their styles? What changed?
Yeah, they are different. Yeah. But I like the people that Eversole had under him too, like Bob Tischler. His people were good. I liked the film unit. I forget, there was a woman there, Barbara something or other, I think her name was. I liked working for Eversole. I liked working for Lauren. Audrey used to make me a little crazy because she was such a dictator, but I never had a real problem with her.
Mm-hmm. So, but in general, talk about the pace and the production schedule and the challenges for you as AD on the show, and especially like when it comes down to Friday night and Saturday. Like, had you ever experienced, even in news, like had you ever experienced any kind of freneticism like happens at SNL?
In the news area, with a news show?
I mean, just to compare it to something that, it's live, that's similar, but where do the similarities break down? How is SNL its own beast?
Well, Fridays were like torture, and then so were Saturdays. Because they would overproduce the show.
Meaning they have more skits.
They would have more sketches than they really should have, build more scenery. And then suddenly they would add stuff, which used to make me crazy. So you thought you were going to get out, and then suddenly they decided they would write another sketch, or there'd be another sketch would come in. And I used to go crazy over that, and I used to speak out against it and yell at Kenny and say, and Davey did too, many times. I'd say, what the hell is this? We're supposed to be out of here now, and you want to block another sketch, that kind of thing. I was always outspoken about everything, and critical. And I don't know how they put up with me, but they did. But I wasn't rude. I was just used to say, this is insane, and why are we doing this? I mean, I remember spending long times with Jack Handy's Toonces the Cat, doing pre-tapes on a Friday night till all hours, trying to get a puppet to shave or a cat to shave and stuff like that. I said, what the hell is this like, But I loved Jack Handy. He was a nice guy. He'd be in the back there trying to stand in the back of us. I don't know.
Did you watch the show before you worked on it? Had you been
No, not
never?
really. I never watched much television. She can tell you that. I watch movies a lot.
Yeah.
I like movies. But then Saturday would be another kind of torture, especially between Dress and Air, when Lauren would totally revamp the show.
What do you mean totally revamp
He
the
would
show?
He'd have a meeting that would begin about 11:15, if you were lucky. And it had to be over by 11 o'clock because you had to get ready. And he'd be up there like presiding over these notes, and you would be scrambling to put your script in order. That was the biggest fear, that you would sit there, be on the air live, and your script wouldn't be in the right order. So that when you turned the page, you weren't in the right spot, and you were always flying one cue to the next.
You talk about it
They
because
call it flying. Davey used to use the expression flying. We're flying. Well, what he meant was we don't know what the hell we're doing because everything changed. The blocking changed, the shots changed. So even when things would go wrong, and if I did something wrong, I'd apologize. I'd say, we were flying.
Did
That was his-
Ebersol do that? Did Ebersol
No,
tweak?
no. Ebersol was more. He would just be impulsive about it, and he decided he wanted something, and he would just feel that it's up to you guys to make it work. You couldn't say to him, but the blocking is being changed big time here. You know, he didn't care. You'd have camera meeting and go over the shots, change the shots around.
So, I mean, just to put it in context, the dress rehearsal happens at 10 p.m. on Saturday night, and it ends at little before 11 with you going on the air again live at
No, it
11:30.
always ends by a little after 10 or 10
Oh,
o'clock.
it ends by 10 o'clock.
Yeah, then
So you have like an hour and a half
exactly.
to
But
basically do what? Like,
Lorne meets first with his writers and associate producers and producers like Steve Higgins. Then he calls up the rest of the team, principal people, technical director, AD director, associate director, the two associate directors, well, one associate director. I don't go to those meetings anymore, but when I was principal AD, I did. And they're all in there, and he's giving notes. And page this, we're going to, and the PA will come in and cross out this speech, that speech. So you'll go from page 18, the bottom speech on page 18 to the bottom speech on page 19 or whatever. In the middle of cross speeches out. And PAs are scrambling now to retime the show. We always go in wrong with time, always.
really?
Yeah.
By how much, usually?
Lorne doesn't seem to care about that. He worries about it on the air. We can go in like 5-6 minutes over for a live show.
So then will something get cut just last minute? You
Yeah,
won't know
he'll
until...
cut stuff. Sometimes he'll collapse. There are certain islands that can be collapsed where there was formerly an act, he gets rid of the act. Say between 6 and 7 are being, position 6 and 6A are being collapsed. So in other words, he'll kill that sketch, maybe a 4-minute sketch, he picks up 4 minutes right there, gets rid of the whole sketch, and then we collapse the commercial.
How much is he in the control room with you? Where is he
No,
during the
he's
show?
never in the control room, he's out on the floor, he produces from the floor.
And so he's calling, he will like, when does he let you know that something was live cut?
He lets it know through the coordinating producer, Ken Among, and the PAs, who are keeping time.
So your role during the live show when you were principal AD is what? We saw some of the tape of you sitting next to Dave Wilson and you're pointing to his script as he's flying and you're trying to, what was your
also
responsibility?
cueing sound effects, cueing music. Sometimes rolling with Paul Bill, I had to roll all the tapes. Cueing graphics. Making the changes on the graphics during the update, stuff like that. Getting them on and off the air on time, in and out of commercial on time.
Is that in your head or how do you keep track of the time?
No, you can't do that in your head. When you have a control studio and then you're on with the AD on the other end, who also keeps tab of how much is left, you know, I do it too, but if I get distracted with something else, he or she will let me know that we're going to switch you back in 15 seconds and that kind of thing. You'll be back, because when that commercial ends, they just switch us back and we're back on the air. So we have to be ready to do whatever we're supposed to do.
Have you ever not been ready?
Yeah, we're pretty much ready, but sometimes weird things happen. Once I counted back the network, and I was wrong in my count, and I cued the stage manager to cue the talent. It was Joe Dixon. And I looked at the network, and we were still in commercial. Control studio hadn't switched us back yet. So I panicked, and I just yelled to the stage manager, stopped them and regrouped them. I didn't even say anything to Davey. And he looked at me, I says, I counted wrong. And Joey did stop them and regroup them, and And then we were back, we queued, and there was no outage on the air. Later, when I went to apologize to them, they told me they didn't care. They said, Bobby, we didn't care. He said, Joey cued us, we performed. He stopped us, we stopped. He said,
Go again, you go.
reset, we reset. He cued us again, we performed. And we're so nice about it. Because that's embarrassing to them, right?
Anything on air though that made it to screen that?
Well, when I was there when Sinead O'Connor ripped up the picture of the Pope, I had my hands right on that applause button, ready to cue it.
And
I didn't even care about the Pope, but when I saw that, I said, better not cue this applause, which I didn't. And I didn't, and thank God I didn't.
so no one knew she was going to do that.
No one knew she was going to do it.
What happened right after?
Well, Lorne, I'm sure, had some words with her about it, and it said, well, it had already been done. I had to go do the edit and correct it for the West Coast.
What was corrected?
I did the edit. The AD does all the edits on this show, so I edited it for the West Coast. I put in the intro from Dress.
Oh, okay. So it didn't air that way on the West Coast? Okay.
Didn't air on the West Coast that way, only the East Coast. And the Central.
Would Dave have been able to do anything? Like take her
No,
off
there's
camera?
nothing you could do.
or
There's no
nothing?
delay or anything.
Yeah. Anything
Well,
else?
I could have, I mean, there were ways of editing, a lot of ways of editing it, but I just put in the dressed intro, which matched, it all matched,
she
Same,
didn't in
same
dress?
wardrobe and everything.
Right. Right.
What am I saying intro? I put in the dress, the
The-
whole dress production of her.
The whole
Yeah,
whole
the
take.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, not the intro. She did it at the end.
Right.
I don't know why I'm saying intro.
Let's take a quick break because
Okay.
it's been another hour and stop.